Hey, my name is Caleb. I'm 32 years old, and I fix old buildings for a living out past the edge of Galena, Illinois, where the hills fold down toward the river, and half the houses are older than the state. I'm what people used to call a restoration carpenter, though most folks just call me when something they thought would last forever finally stops holding. A porch that's gone soft on one corner. A church door that's swelled shut over 100 winters. A staircase that creaks in a way that worries the people who paid for it. I take the old thing apart far enough to find where it gave up, and I put it back so it holds again. I don't replace things if I can save them. There's a difference, and most people don't notice it, but I do. I learned the trade from a man named Walt Brennan, who had hands like split firewood and no patience for anything fast. Walt used to tell me that a joint doesn't hold because the wood is strong. It holds because two pieces were cut to give a little where the other one pushes. He said that maybe 400 times over 9 years, usually while watching me cut a joint wrong, and I didn't understand what he actually meant by it until a lot later, on a Saturday I'll get to. My days were simple, and I won't pretend they weren't. I'd wake up before 5 out of habit, make coffee in a pot that was older than I had any right to keep using, drive out to whatever building was waiting for me, and work with my hands until the light went orange. Then I'd drive home to a farmhouse I'd been restoring for myself for 6 years, eat something out of a pan, sit on the back step for a while, and go to bed early so I could do it again. It was a good life by most measures. The work was honest, and the house was getting better one room at a time. The phone just didn't light up much after about 8 at night. That's all. I'm not saying it like it's a tragedy. I'd gotten used to a house where the only sound was the one I made, and I'd told myself a long time ago that a man who builds things, meant to outlast the people who order them, ought to be able to outlast a little quiet. I believed that most days. There'd been someone, once. Her name was Rachel, and we were engaged for almost a year. And 3 springs back she sat me down at the kitchen table and told me she wanted a different kind of life than the one I was offering. A bigger one. A louder one. I didn't fight her on it. That was my fault, and I knew it even while I was doing it. I'm the kind of man who thinks showing up every single day is the same thing as saying the words out loud, and it isn't. And she'd been waiting a long time for words I kept saving for later. She married a man with a boat and a house on a lake within 2 years. I didn't go. I just got better at the quiet. The worst part of my pride isn't that it kept me from chasing her. It's that I called it dignity, and let it sit in the house with me like a dog I'd stopped being able to afford to feed. That Saturday in early June, I drove out to St. Brigid's, the little stone church on the county road, to collect the last of what I was owed for 2 months of work. I'd spent that spring rebuilding the altar rail and resetting 40 feet of pew that had pulled loose from the floor. The new bride's family had booked the church for a noon wedding, and I'd been told to come by around 11 to settle the bill before the guests arrived, then make myself scarce. So I came in my one-collared shirt, with my invoice folded in my back pocket, and I sat in the very last pew waiting for somebody with a checkbook. And then the wedding started before anybody paid me, and I didn't feel right walking out in the middle of it. So I stayed. I want to be honest about what kind of crowd it was, because it matters later. It was money. Not the easy kind that's been around so long it forgets to show off, but the newer, sharper kind that needs everyone in the room to know exactly what it's worth. The flowers cost more than my truck. There was a woman in the front pew on the groom's side in a pale gray suit who sat the way some people sit when they own the building, the air, and the people breathing it, and I'd learned soon enough that her name was Vivian Ashford, and that I was right about her. The bride came up the aisle alone. No father to give her away. She had a little girl walking ahead of her, maybe 7 years old. in a green dress, dropping flower petals out of a basket with the grim concentration of somebody who's been told this is the most important job in the world. The bride's eyes were already glassy before she reached the front, and I thought it was just the kind of crying people do at their own weddings. The good kind. I was wrong about that too. The groom never came. I'll tell it the way it happened. The pastor stood up front looking at his watch. The best man went out a side door and came back with his phone in his hand and a face like a man carrying a dead bird. He didn't even walk all the way to the bride. He stopped about 10 feet short of her and read off the screen, too loud, because he didn't know what to do with his voice. The groom wasn't coming. The groom was sorry. The groom had realized this wasn't right, and he hoped she'd understand someday. 3 sentences off a phone, in a church full of 300 people, while a 7-year-old stood at the front holding an empty flower basket. The bride didn't move. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The whole room moved, the gasp, the murmur, the polished woman in gray standing up smooth as oil and turning to leave like the show was simply over. But the bride stood completely still, the way a building stands still in the first second after something load-bearing lets go, before anyone can see the crack. Then the people started filing out. That was the worst part. Worse than the text. 300 people who'd come to watch this woman be chosen now standing up in waves and shuffling toward the doors, not unkindly, just relieved to be gone, leaving her up there alone in front of a cold altar while the organist didn't know whether to keep playing. I want to tell you I stood up right away. I didn't. I almost slipped out the side door with everybody else. I had my invoice in my pocket and a long list of reasons that none of this was mine to carry. I'm not anyone's hero. I'm a man who fixes joists. I had a job in Hanover starting Monday, and a check I still hadn't been handed, and no business at all in the middle of somebody else's catastrophe. I had my hand on the back of the pew, halfway up, ready to be one more body heading for the exit. What stopped me was the little girl. She'd put her flower basket down on the altar step and walked back to the bride and taken hold of 2 of her fingers, the way little kids do, and she was looking up at her face, trying to read what was happening. And the bride was looking straight ahead at nothing and holding the front of her own dress in both fists. Not to lift it, just to have something to hold. And I thought about Rachel at my kitchen table, and about all the people who'd filed out of this woman's life in the last 90 seconds because staying would have cost them a little discomfort, and I thought, somebody in this room has to not leave. So I went up the aisle against the current of everyone leaving it. Up close she was a wreck, in the plain way that real grief makes people, with none of the softness movies put on it. The veil had come loose on one side and hung down her neck like something she'd given up on. 2 thin lines of mascara had run and dried on her cheeks, and she hadn't wiped them, because wiping them would have meant admitting they were there. Her knuckles where she gripped her own dress were white. She was maybe 25. She looked at me when I stopped in front of her with no idea who I was, and there was nothing left in her face to be embarrassed with, which is its own kind of terrible to see. The polished woman in gray had stopped at the end of the front pew and turned back to watch, the way you'd watch to make sure a fire was fully out. I found out her name in the next 2 minutes, Vivian Ashford, mother of the groom, because she said it herself, to me like a password I was supposed to recognize. "And who exactly are you?" she said. Not really a question. "I fixed the rail you're standing next to," I said. I don't fully know what made me say what I said next. I'd like to claim it was something noble. The truth is it was simpler and a little bit angrier than that. I looked at that woman in gray, who had cost this girl her dignity in front of 300 people and was now standing there making sure the damage took. And I looked at the bride holding her dress in her fists, and at the kid holding her 2 fingers, and I heard the doors of the church opening and closing behind me as the last of the audience left. And I made the decision in about the same amount of time it takes to decide a board is square enough to cut. I turned to the bride, and I said it loud enough that Vivian Ashford and the pastor and the stalled-out organist and the dozen stragglers in the back could all hear it clear. "I'll marry you," I said. "Right now." The whole church went quiet in a different way than before. She stared at me. "I'm not going to dress it up." She didn't fall into my arms. Her first word when it came was, "What?" "You came here to walk out married," I said, quieter now, just to her. "So, walk out married. I'm not asking you for anything. I've got a house with too many empty rooms and a name that's about to be on a marriage license one way or the other. It might as well do some good for somebody. You don't have to mean it. You just don't have to walk out of here the way they want you to." I knew, even saying it, that you can't actually get married on the floor of a church just by deciding to. There's paper. There's a license with 2 names already on it, and neither of them was mine. The pastor said as much, gently, but the offer was real. And I meant the part of it that mattered, which was the part where she didn't have to leave that building alone and discard it with everyone watching. I held out my arm. After a long moment, she let go of her dress with one hand and took it. And the little girl took her other hand, and the 3 of us walked back down that long aisle and out the front doors into the June light while Vivian Ashford watched us go and said nothing. Because for once there was nothing for her to own. Her name was Nora. Nora Vance. The little girl was her sister, Lily. Not her daughter, her sister, 7 years old, and Nora had been raising her alone since their mother died 2 years back. Their father had been gone since before Lily could talk. They'd given up their apartment in town the week before, because Nora was supposed to be moving into the Ashford house as a married woman, and now they had a car with a packed trunk and a sister with the wedding dress still on, and exactly nowhere to put either of them. I didn't ask any of that in the church parking lot. She told me most of it 3 days later, at my kitchen table, after she'd run out of other doors to knock on. Because here's what I'd learned in the parking lot. Watching her stand by her loaded-down car, not knowing which direction to drive. The offer I'd made as a gesture was the only real thing anybody had handed her all day. I told her there was a room in my house that already had a bed in it, and a smaller one I could fix up for the girl in a weekend, and that she could stay until she figured out her next move, and that nobody was keeping score. She said no the first time. She said no the second time, in the harder voice of a woman who has learned that free things cost the most. She came on the 3rd day, when she'd done the math on the motel and lost. We went to the county courthouse the following Thursday, and got married for real, with a license that had my name on it, and a clerk as a witness, and Lily holding a paper cup of vending machine cocoa. I want to be clear that it was a practical thing. Nora needed a fixed address that wasn't a motel, and stability she could point to if anyone asked her whether a 7-year-old was being taken care of, and I had both to give, and no one to give them to. We agreed out loud, standing in that beige hallway, that it was an arrangement. 2 strangers, and a kid, and a roof. I told myself that's all it was. I believed that too for a while. I'm a slow man. I'll get to that. The farmhouse had 4 bedrooms, and I'd only ever finished one of them. I gave Nora the big room at the front, and I took the room off the kitchen I'd been using as an office. And the 3rd room, the small one over the porch with the good morning light, I gave to Lily. The first weekend they were there, I framed in a closet she didn't have, hung a door that actually closed, and built her a window seat under the south window with a lid that lifted so she could keep her things inside. I'm decent at fast work when it's for the right reason. Lily sat on the floor of her empty room and watched me the whole time without saying a word. which is how I learned that she's the kind of kid who decides about a person slowly. When I set the seat in and lifted the lid to show her the space inside, she climbed in, sat down, looked at the morning light coming through the window, and said, "It's mine?" And I said yes, and she nodded once like she'd finished a piece of important business, and that was the beginning of Lily and me. Nora was harder, and she should have been. She didn't trust the arrangement, and she didn't trust me, and she was right not to. A man who hands a stranger a marriage and a house in the space of a week is either a saint or running an angle, and Nora had just learned the hard way what the world does to women who guess wrong about which one a man is. So she set rules the first night, in the kitchen, with her chin up. She'd pay rent the day she had $1. She'd cook and clean to earn her keep until then, but it was a job, not a wifely duty, and I shouldn't confuse the two. The bedroom door locked, and I was never to test it, and the day she could stand on her own, she'd take Lily and go, no apologies, and I wasn't to make it complicated. "Fine by me," I said. "I built the lock myself. It's a good one." She almost smiled at that. Almost, I counted it as a win and went to bed. What I didn't expect, what nobody expects, which is the whole point, was what she did to my business. I'm a good carpenter and a worse businessman, and that's putting it kindly. I'd been doing the books, if you can call it that, out of a shoebox and the truck glove compartment for 9 years. I undercharged people I liked, which was most people. I'd finish a job and feel awkward about the money and tell folks to settle up whenever, and a startling number of them took me at my word and never did. I worked 6 days a week and was somehow always $200 short of comfortable, and I'd more or less decided that's just how it was for a man with my trade and my temperament. Nora found the shoebox the second week while looking for a screwdriver. She didn't ask permission. She spread 9 years of crumpled invoices and unsigned estimates across my kitchen table and went still in a way I'd only seen once before, in the church. And then she started sorting. It took her 4 evenings. On the 5th, she sat me down with 3 columns of numbers in her own neat handwriting and told me that I'd performed about $31,000 of work in the last 2 years that I'd never been paid for, that I was charging roughly 40% under the going rate for restoration in 3 counties, and that 2 of my biggest clients had been quietly stiffing me for so long, they'd probably forgotten they owed me anything at all. "You're not poor," she said. "You're just bad at being owed money. Those are different problems, and one of them I can fix by Friday." It turned out she'd kept the books for the Ashford family's real estate firm for 4 years. That's how she'd met Preston Ashford in the first place, across a desk, fixing the kind of expensive mistakes that men like that make, and then resent you for catching. She knew exactly how money moves and exactly how people avoid moving it towards someone who's too polite to ask. She wrote my invoices the next morning in language I'd have been embarrassed to use and would never have dared, and she mailed them, and within a month I'd collected $11,000 I'd written off as gone. She did it from my kitchen table with Lily doing homework beside her, and she did it well. And I watched the woman who'd walked out of that church, with nothing but a roof of her own making over her own head in front of me. And I understood that I had not rescued anyone. I'd just opened a door for somebody who'd been carrying her own ladder the whole time. I told her that, more or less, one evening on the porch. I said I'd thought I was doing her a favor, and it turned out she was the one who'd straightened out my entire life in a month. She looked out at the dark for a second. Then she said, "You did do me a favor. You just did it the right way. You handed me a tool instead of carrying me. Most men want to carry you. It makes them feel big, and it keeps you small. You handed me the books, and got out of the way. She paused. I noticed. That's the kind of thing she said. Not soft. True. We fell into something like a rhythm over that summer, which is the part of the story that doesn't have any drama in it, and is also the part that mattered most. She stopped flinching when I came into a room. I started finding reasons to be wherever she was working. I'd be under a sink in town all day, thinking up things that needed doing around the house, just so I'd have an excuse to be near the kitchen in the evening. We worked on the third floor of the farmhouse together on Sundays, her stripping a century of paint off the banister while I reset the treads, the two of us not talking much. Passing tools, Lily playing in the sawdust with a wooden goat I'd carved her, a lopsided thing with ears that came out wrong. Lily named it and refused to be parted from it, and informed me, gravely, that its ears were kind of weird, but okay. That's the kindest review my work's ever gotten, I told her. I think it's the only review your work's ever gotten, Nora said from the banister, not looking up, and that was the first time I heard her actually laugh, and I had to go out to the truck for a tool I didn't need so I could stand in the yard for a minute and get my face back under control. I want to tell you about one evening in particular, because it's the one the whole thing turns on, even though nothing happens in it. It was late July, and Lily was asleep, and Nora and I were sitting on the back step where I'd sat alone for 6 years, with a citronella candle going and 2 glasses of iced tea sweating between us, and the fields were doing that thing they do at dusk where the heat lifts off them in a kind of shimmer. We'd been quiet a long time, and then, with no warning, in a flat voice, looking at the candle and not at me, she told me the thing she'd been carrying. She told me that Preston Ashford had never once chosen her, that his mother had picked Nora out as a sensible match, pretty enough, smart enough, poor enough to be grateful, useful with the family's money, and that Preston had gone along with it the way he went along with everything his mother arranged, and that Nora had known, somewhere underneath, that she was being selected like a competent hire, and had told herself it was enough, because it came with stability for Lily, and stability for Lily was the only thing she'd let herself want for 2 years. She told me her whole life had been a series of rooms she'd had to audition to stay in. Her mother's love had been conditional and exhausting. Her father had left rather than meet a single one of her needs. And Preston was just the last man in a long line to make her feel like she was being kept on probation, right up until the morning he didn't show. When she learned she'd failed an audition she hadn't even known was still running. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," she said. "I'm telling you so you understand why I locked the door. It's not about you. I've just never in my life been somewhere I didn't have to earn the right to stay in by morning." I didn't say much. I've learned that the wrong thing to do when somebody hands you their wound is to start fixing it out loud, the way you'd fix a hinge. Here's what we'll do. Here's how we'll make it right. That's what people who don't understand do. I sat with it for a minute. Then I told her the one true thing I had, which was about Rachel, and about how my fault had never been that I couldn't love somebody. My fault was that I thought love was a thing you proved by showing up, year after year, in silence, and that I'd let the only woman I'd ever asked to stay walk out the door, because I was too proud and too slow to say a single word she could actually hold on to. I told her that I knew what it was to be the kind of person who lets people leave, because saying stay feels like a thing you haven't earned the right to say. "So I'm not going to tell you you've got it wrong about doors," I said. "I'd be a liar. I'll just tell you nobody in this house is grading you. The lock's yours. You can keep it as long as you want. But you're not on probation here. There's no morning where I take it back." She didn't say anything. After a while, she reached over and put her hand on the back of mine, on the step. Just for a second, just long enough to mean it. And then she took it back. I didn't move my hand for a long time after she'd taken hers away. That was the night I understood what was happening to me, and I didn't say it, and I didn't make a move, and I got up and rinsed the glasses and went to my room off the kitchen. But I'll tell you the truth. The line I'd been so careful not to look at was right there in front of me now, plain as a chalk mark on a board, and I knew exactly where it was, and I knew I was going to cross it. I just didn't know yet what it would take. What it took was the Ashfords coming back. It was the second week of September, a Tuesday, and a black car I didn't recognize came up my gravel drive while I was on the roof of the barn replacing flashing. Vivian Ashford got out of it, in another pale suit, with a man in a darker one carrying a leather folder. And I knew before I was halfway down the ladder that polished people don't drive out to a farm for a friendly reason. She'd come, she said, to be reasonable. She used that word about 6 times. She said the whole thing at the church had become an embarrassing little story in their circle, and stories like that needed correcting before they hardened into facts. She wanted Nora to sign a document. The man in the dark suit was a lawyer, and the leather folder had the document in it, stating that the wedding had been called off by mutual agreement, a misunderstanding, no one's fault, that there had never been a public humiliation because there had never been anything to be humiliated about. In exchange, there was a number. A generous number, she said. Enough to set a young woman and her sister up nicely somewhere far away, where neither the Ashford name nor any of this needed to be thought about again. And then she said the part she'd actually come to say, the part the money was the polite wrapping for. She said that if Nora wouldn't be reasonable, if she insisted on staying out here playing house with a handyman in a marriage anyone could see was a sham invented in a moment of hysteria, then the Ashfords had begun to wonder, aloud, to certain people, whether a young woman, that unstable, jilted one week and married to a stranger the next, living hand-to-mouth in a half-finished farmhouse, was really a fit guardian for a vulnerable 7-year-old child. She said there were people whose job it was to look into questions like that. She said it would be a shame to have to raise the question. She let the shame hang in the air. Nora had come out onto the porch by then with Lily behind her, and I watched her face do the thing I'd seen it do twice before, the going still, the load letting go somewhere out of sight. I came across the yard, and I put myself between the porch steps and Vivian Ashford. I didn't raise my voice. I've never been able to raise my voice in a way that helps anything. That's not where my strength is, if I have any. I just moved, so that to get any closer to that porch she'd have had to go through me, and I said, plainly, you need to leave. I'm having a conversation, she said. You're done having it, I said. She told you what she came here knowing. There's nothing in that folder she needs. Vivian smiled the way that kind of person smiles when a man like me opens his mouth. She started to say something about how this didn't concern me, how I was a temporary arrangement, how. And then Nora came down the steps and stood beside me. Not behind me. Beside Mrs. Ashford, she said, and her voice was perfectly level, which is more frightening than any amount of shouting if you know how to hear it. You picked me out for your son like you were buying a reliable car. You never once asked him if he wanted me. You arranged a wedding to make a tidy match, and you blew it up the morning of when you decided the match wasn't tidy enough. And you let 300 people watch you do it. And you let my little sister stand at the front of a church holding a basket while you walked out. I didn't do that. You did. That's not a story that needs correcting. That's just what happened. You'll never prove. I'm not trying to prove anything, Nora said. I'm telling you. I kept your firm's books for 4 years. I know exactly how your money moves and exactly which of those movements you'd rather no one looked at too closely, and I never said a word about any of it, because that's not who I am. But you came to my home and you used Lily's name as a threat. So let me be very clear about one thing. The same way you were clear with me. She took a step closer to the woman, not away. You will never come near my sister again. Not with a question. Not with a lawyer. Not with a number. The next time you say her name to anyone, I stop being a woman who keeps quiet about other people's books. Do you understand me? Because I think you do. I think you've understood exactly who I am since the first time we sat across a desk, and I think it's always scared you a little. And I think that's the real reason you wanted me gone. The lawyer had stopped writing. He was a man who'd come out to a farm expecting an easy afternoon, and he had just done the math that men like him are paid to do. And he closed the leather folder without being asked. Vivian Ashford stood there a moment longer with nothing to own. Then she went back to the black car, and the car went back down the drive, and the dust came up behind it and settled, and that was the end of the Ashfords. They were never anything but selfish, in the ordinary way that most people who've never been told no learn to be, and they were beaten the only way that kind ever is, which is by somebody standing in their own yard and refusing to be smaller than the truth. Old Walt came by that evening. I'd called him to help with the barn flashing earlier in the week, and he'd promised to come look. He found me sitting on the back step a little wrecked, Nora inside getting Lily to bed, and I told him most of what had happened. Walt's 73 and has buried a wife and outlived his usefulness to nobody, and he listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is rare for him. When I was done, he was quiet a while, looking at the barn. "You know what I always told you about a joint," he said. "Two pieces that give a little where the other one pushes." "That's right." He nodded slowly. "You've been telling yourself this whole thing's an arrangement. Paper and a roof." He looked at me sideways. "Son, you built that girl's sister a window seat in a weekend. Arrangements don't carve goats. I watched you go to the truck for nothing this morning twice." He stood up with the groan of a man his age. "Love doesn't always start at the front, with the romance and the music. Sometimes it starts at the back, with somebody doing a kindness when no one's making them. You started at the back a long time ago. You're just slow getting to the front." He clapped me once on the shoulder. "Don't be as slow as you were with the last one. You don't get a fresh board every time." Then he drove home, because Walt has never in his life stayed in a room 1 minute past the true thing. I sat out there a long while after he left. When Nora came out, she had 2 glasses of tea, like the night in July, and she sat down on the step beside me. And I knew that if I was ever going to say the words I'd spent my whole life saving for later, it was now, on this step, before I talked myself into later one more time. So I went first. That part I'd learned. You go first, and you go through the fault before you get to the feeling. Because the fault is the thing that's been holding everything tight, and you have to let it go before anything else can move. I have to tell you something, and I'm going to do it badly, because I do everything that involves words badly, I said. I told you this was an arrangement. I told myself the same thing. A roof and some paper, and you'd go when you could stand on your own, and I wasn't to make it complicated. I've been saying that to myself for 3 months like a man double-checking a lock. I made myself keep going. And it's been a lie for most of them. Somewhere back around the time I built that window seat, I stopped wanting you to be able to stand on your own well enough to leave. And I didn't say anything, because I'm a coward in exactly one specific way. I let Rachel walk out a door rather than say stay, because I never thought I'd earned the right to ask anyone to. And I was about to do it again. I was going to let you get strong enough to go, and then stand here in the dust like I did the last time, and call it dignity. I looked at her. "I don't want you to go, Nora. I haven't wanted it for a long time. That's the whole thing. I just needed to say the word out loud before I let it cost me twice. She was quiet for what felt like a year. Then she set her tea down on the step. "You really are slow, Caleb Hartley," she said. "I've been told. I think I stopped being a stranger in this house the day you handed me a shoebox instead of a check," she said. "Every man before you either wanted to keep me or wanted to be thanked for keeping me. You're the only one who ever just made room and got out of the way, and then carved my sister a goat with weird ears." Her voice caught, just slightly, on the goat. "I locked that door for 3 months, waiting to find out what you really wanted. It took me about 6 weeks to figure out the answer was nothing, and another 6 to forgive you for it. Because a man who wants nothing is the most dangerous kind to a woman who spent her whole life paying for everything. I didn't want to need this. I didn't want to need you." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the same gesture she hadn't allowed herself in the church. Finally allowed. "The lock's been unlocked for a month. I just kept hoping you'd notice on your own and walk slow." Then she leaned over and kissed me, there on the step where I'd spent 6 years getting good at the quiet. And it was nothing like the careful, public, paper version of us at the courthouse. It was certain. It tasted like sweet tea and the end of being afraid, and it had taken us both far too long to get to, and we both knew it. And that was part of why it held. When she pulled back, she put her forehead against mine and said the thing that made it real going forward. The thing that connected all the way back to a church floor in June. "I came up that aisle alone," she said. "I keep thinking about it. Everybody I'd ever tried to belong to had already turned around and started leaving, and I was standing there holding my own dress, and you were the only person in the whole building walking the wrong way. Toward me." She closed her eyes. "I've been trying to figure out for 3 months why a stranger would do that. I think I finally get it. You weren't being a hero. You just don't leave. That's all you are, underneath everything. You're a man who doesn't leave." She breathed out. Took me 25 years to find one of those. A year later, the farm looked like a different place. Because it was. The shop is busy now in a way it never was, and, more to the point, it gets paid. Because Nora runs the books from a little office we built into the 2nd bedroom, and I haven't seen a shoebox in 14 months. I charge the right rate now. We fixed the barn roof properly and re-shingled the south face of the house, and finally finished the 4th bedroom, which has been Lily's project as much as anyone's. She picked the color, which is a green, almost exactly like the dress she wore up the aisle, though I've never said that out loud, and never will. The wooden goat with the weird ears sits on her windowsill above the seat I built her. And last month she informed me she's decided the ears aren't weird after all. They're just his. Which I've thought about more than a grown man should think about a thing a child says. We had a second wedding in the spring. A small one. In the yard. With Walt and about 15 other people. And no one in a pale gray suit. It was the same 2 people and the same piece of paper, more or less. But it wasn't an arrangement this time, and everybody there knew it. Nora wore a plain blue dress because she said she was done with anything white, and I wore my one-collared shirt, and Lily walked up the grass ahead of us dropping flower petals with the same grim, holy concentration she'd had in the church, finishing a job she'd had to leave undone a year before. When she set the empty basket down at the end, she looked up at the 2 of us and nodded once, the way she does, like she'd finally finished an important piece of business, and Nora had to look away at the fields for a minute. And so did I. There's a thing I see most evenings now that I want to tell you about, because it's the truest thing I own, and it isn't dramatic at all. After supper, Nora sits at the kitchen table with the books spread out, and Lily does her homework next to her. And I come in from the shop, and there's a plate kept warm for me, and the lamp's on, and the whole house is loud the way I once told myself I could outlast the absence of. And some nights Nora puts her hand flat against her stomach without seeming to notice she's doing it. Because there's going to be one more of us in the house come October. And I'll catch her doing it, and she'll catch me catching her, and neither of us will say anything. Because we don't have to. We're past the part where the important things have to be said out loud. We learn to say them in time. And now, we get to just live inside them. I had once believed my life would only ever be old buildings, early mornings, a fault I never fixed, and a house I'd gotten too good at keeping quiet. I thought the best thing a man like me could hope for was to outlast the silence. But Walt was right about the only thing he ever taught me that mattered. A joint doesn't hold because the wood is strong. It holds because two pieces were cut to give a little, each one bending exactly where the other one pushes, until you can't tell anymore which part is holding up which. Nora came up that aisle alone, and I walked the wrong way down it toward her, and for a long time I thought I was the one who'd stepped up to hold the weight. I had it backwards the whole time. We were just two broken pieces who'd both spent our lives expecting to be left, finding out at the same moment that the only thing that ever holds is the giving. I stood up in that church and said I'd marry her right now. It's the one fast decision I ever made in my whole slow life, and it's the only thing I ever built that I know for certain is going to last longer than I do.